All right, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara Daf Yud. Yesterday we went from Mishnah to Mishnah. Today we'll be doing the same thing as well, starting at a Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Beis and Mid Beis and heading to a Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Gimel and Mid Beis. Let us jump right in. If there's a city that's celebrating an Avodas Kochavim, me'utaros. They have stores that are decorated and they have stores that are not decorated. This happened in the city of Beishan. The Chachamim paskend when this case scenario came up, ha-me'utaros asuros, v'she'enan me'utaros mutaros. The words sound very same, me'utaros and mutaros, but they're spelled differently in many ways. So the stores that were decorated were usher for the yid to visit. The stores that were not decorated were not usher. Rashi, right here, 15 lines from the bottom, she'en me'utaros mutaros. Rashi says, no taxes were then given to the avodas kochavim. No hana ended up, like if I shop there and I pay taxes and those taxes go to the avodas kochavim, so then I'm being mahana the avodas kochavim. We'll see that this is not such a simple idea as our Gemara will soon debate. The Gemara opens on Yud Beis and Mid Beis toward the bottom. Amr Shimon ben Lakish, lo shanu elam utaros bevered v'hadas. This is true only when it is decorated with vered, which are roses, and hadassim, right? That's what we see on Sukkot. To come mishane merecha, because says the Gemara, in those cases your mishane merecha. Rashi says 4 lines from the bottom to come mishane merecha. It was customary to lay them out in front of the avodas kochavim. And that's usher because of what's called tikroves avodas kochavim. It shmeks. Well, in this case, literally. I didn't mean it even that way. So that would have been a fine joke. It just wasn't a joke. But it just it's very close to the Isra of Avodah Zara, so we want to avoid that. Aval me'utaros beperos, says Rav Shimon ben Lakish. But what if it's not me'utaros with something that smells good? It's just me'utaros with bananas and with apples and oranges that really they don't have a smell similar to roses. They may have a smell, a small one, but they only when they're open and citrusy for the oranges, you don't really smell them unless you put them up against your nose. So says the Gemara, my time. Why is it that we have this distinction of vered and hadas, which is aser, and me'utaros beperos, which is not? You're not allowed to have any contact from that which is left over. And this is the drasha that's difficult. Nehenehu de aser, benefiting is aser. That's why the vered and the hadas are aser. And top of Yud Gimel, and this is a difficult line. Mehanashari, giving hana to the avodah zara people is acceptable. Very shver, right? Because our Mishnah didn't say that. Our Mishnah wanted to say that you're giving taxes to them. It doesn't feel right. Okay, I have to figure out how to learn that. But either way, he doesn't get very far because Rav Yochanan on the top line pushes back right away. Rav Yochanan Amar, afilu mutaros beperos nahami aser. No, even if the stores were decorated with fruits, that would be just as aser. And he tells a kal v'chomer. He says nehne aser. If you benefit aser, mahne lo kol shekain, making them enjoy, isn't that all the more so aser? This svara could go lakan lakan. I could hear this kal v'chomer not working, and I could hear it working. I could have heard it the reversed too. I could have argued that if they're benefiting and it's aser, all the more so if you're benefiting and it's aser. But that's not how the Gemara frames it. The Gemara says the opposite. The Gemara says if you benefiting is aser, isn't it all the more so that they benefiting from it would be aser? It's a very interesting kal v'chomer. It's not glat to me. Doesn't seem like a glat kal v'chomer. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says. So now we have this machlokes between Rav Shimon ben Lakish, who says that if it's me'utaros beperos, it's mutter, and Rav Yochanan, who says that when it's me'utaros beperos, it is still aser, based on the kal v'chomer. So the Gemara says, hold on one second, we have a problem. Meisvei, we have a brisa that seems to not stem with this. The brisa says, this is a very lengthy brisa, and it's about half the page, and then we'll ask another question soon. Says the Gemara, Reb Nosson Omer, Yom she'avodas kochavim, menachas boas hameches, on the day when the taxes are presented, machrizin ve'omrim. This is what they say when the days of the collection of the taxes. They offer a tax credit. Okay, this is what they say. Kol mi shenotel atar v'yaniach berosho uverosh chamoro l'chvod avodas kochavim. Anyone who puts on the crown on their head, and they do the same for their animal, a wreath of some sort, yanichu lo es hameches, you get to pay less in your taxes. It's an electrical vehicle. They're good. A little bit of a reduction. Vim lav, al yanichu lo es hameches. You have to choose. Sa'ad heichan. Yehudi shenimtza sham mayase. If we say yaniach, if he puts it on nimtza nehne, then he's benefiting because he now gets a tax reduction. Lo yaniach, if he doesn't benefit, if he doesn't put the wreath on his head and on his animal, nimtza mahana, he saves them money, which is itself problematic. This is a kasha on Rish Lakish, because Rish Lakish on the top line said about Mahana Shari, giving them benefit is Shari. So this is really our question from this brisa, is that by not putting the wreath on, by not doing this tax deductive activity, I've left the money in their coffers. Now I have to give them full taxes, and they're getting more money from me than had I put the right. So this is how the Gemara is trying to calculate who's right between Rav Shimon ben Lakish and Rav Yochanan. We'll get to this is the punchline, but the Gemara will articulate it later. But the Brisa continues. Mikan Amru. From here, they extrapolated the following. The Chachamim said, Hanoseh v'nosin b'shuk shel avodas kochavim. Anyone who does business on that day of avodas kochavim, and you actually purchased something, so then you're not allowed to keep it in a normal way. If it's a behema, then te'aker. Remember what we said about te'aker? We kind of cut a tendon on the lower leg of one of the legs of the animal. If it's peiros keksus v'kelim, if it's something like fruits or clothing or kelim, yirkavu, we let them rot, we don't take care of them. Ma'os v'kli matachos, if it's coins and if it's things that are made out of metal, yolichem liyam hamelach, they get thrown into the yam hamelach. This idea, the molichem yam hamelach, we've seen in Shas before. Very good. So far, we've already asked our question, but we're still learning the brisa. Ve'ezehu ikur.
I'm assuming in the marketplace, because the similar not be bought for corporate Zara, but the fruit's not going to smell until 2-3 days later. Like you're going to leave the marketplace with good-looking fruit.
Correct.
So what do you avoid?
You're saying that there's a maras ayin piece. No, we're saying that I'm not allowed to benefit from it. So I just got to leave it. Don't touch it. Don't eat it. Don't sell it back to them. You bought it. You made the mistake. You shouldn't have shopped there. It was their Yom Edom. You did something wrong. Now, what do you do with what you bought? If it's a behema, te'aker. If it's something that can just whittle away with time, we let it. It's not a din in.
Sure, you take it home. So
seemingly you don't live there. Seemingly apples take many days to go. Every week my house has bad apples. We always buy too much. It's the same thing every Friday. So nevertheless, we let it go. It doesn't take, but it's not a maras ayin issue. We said that it isn't a maras ayin issue yesterday in the Daf anyways.
It's essentially hektish.
But it's not hektish in that it's holy.
Dusha, right.
It's just that it's usher to you. You're not allowed to benefit from it. So it's saying you're not allowed to benefit is the concern as opposed to maras ayin, which is you're hinting to.
Hektish in the separated sense, not in the...
Yes, correct.
Economic base of the top. Your caboose says that to put it someplace where no one will find it. Don't get any benefit from it.
Shelo yehei naki alavo lidei takala. Not yanichem b'makom. You put it somewhere where it's not easy to make a mistake and eat them. My kids will not grab an apple. I can assure you that will not be happening. L'chaim, I can assure you the things that they pursue are the things that I pursue. My son woke up at 7. He's like, "Can I have an Entenmann's donut?" Literally, that's what happened this morning. I'm like, "No, only after you eat Cocoa Pebbles." It's one of the funniest conversations we've had all year. Parenting of the year. Someone give me a badge. But he did eat his cereal first. It's crazy time. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. Ma'os v'klei what?
Is it 80?
Yeah. Ma'os v'klei matachos. What if you buy something that's metal? Yolichem liyam hamelach. Let's go. Okay, ve'ezu ikor. Oh, I think we read this. Okay, hamanasher parso semino arkuba ulamata. That's cutting some type of tendon, a part of the leg from below the knee. And now the Ketani Mihas. What did we learn in this brisa that makes it difficult for Reb Shimon ben Lakish? Yaniach, we said nimsa nehne, and lo yaniach. If you don't put this wreath on your head in order to please the gods, as it were, lowercase g, and then to get a tax deduction, and therefore you have to pay full taxes. Now you're paying full taxes. Nimtza mehane kasha against Rosh ben Lakish, who said on the top line first is that mahane was shari. So Amar Reb Misharshia Bered Rav Idi, Kasav Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Pligi Rabbanan Alei Rab Nasan. And the brisa that we just learned about Reb Nasan, you're right, Reb Nasan doesn't agree with Reb Shimon ben Lakish. But, says Reb Shimon ben Lakish, there's another opinion in the Tanoim of the Chachamim. The Chachamim are the dissenting opinion. They are not presented in the same brisa as Reb Nasan, but whereas Reb Nasan holds that being mahane is aser, but the Chachamim hold that being mahane is shari. And that is the shita that Reb Shimon ben Lakish is relying upon. The Ana, says the Gemara, I hold like the dissenting opinion that don't hold like Reb Nasan. So really what's happening over here, Reb Shimon ben Lakish is positing that there's a machlokes tanaim about whether or not being mahane an oved kochavim is mutter. So let's just speak this out. The nafkamina case would be this case of put the wreath on your head for a tax deduction. If I do the Avodah Zara, put the wreath on my head for a tax deduction, so then I'm doing a Maisa, either that is Be'etzem Avodah Zara or Tikrovetz Avodah Zara, but I'm lowering my taxes. But if I don't do the Maisa, then I'm being Mahana in that now that I don't have a tax deduction, I'm paying them my full taxes, which is Mahana them. That, according to Rish Lakish, is a machlokes, Reb Nasan and the Chachamim. Reb Nasan holds that that's Aser, and the Chachamim holds that's Shari. What are you supposed to do? What is your other option? You're better off not doing anything, the Chachamim hold. And according to Reb Nasan, they're both aser. I don't even know what you're supposed to do. That's why he says, that's why the next line, Mikan Amru, if you do business with them, you have to burn it. Get out of the city. You shouldn't have been in the city. Now that you're in the city, they're both bad. It's the lesser of two evils. You got to figure out which one it is. And the Gemara doesn't detail that. So says the Gemara, hold on one second. The Rav Yochanan, who holds, definitely like Reb Nasan, who holds that being mahane others in Avodah Zara is aser, does he not hold, Rav Yochanan Savar lo pligi, does he hold that there is no dissenting opinion of the Chachamim, that it's mutter, like Reb Shimon ben Lakish holds? How can you say that? Lo pligi? And now we're going to see where the Chachamim's opinion does exist. The Chachamim who say that being mahane is mutter. Let's see that. We're halfway down on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. The Tanya, the Brisa says, Holchin le Yerid, if you go down to some type of fair, I guess like a flea market of sorts, Shalov de Kochavim, the Lokchen mehen behema avoda avadim ushvachos batim usados uchramim, you buy from an avodas kochavim one of these things that you definitely shouldn't have done. So what do? And v'chosim umale barko shalhem, you write down in a court of law that you've done these things, right? We know the lawyer is not here today. We don't have Michael Schachter, but we know there are dinim in Shulchan Aruch and certainly in Shas about when we're allowed to utilize our kos shel goyim. We do try to use a bezdin wherever appropriate. In our community, they even built a special bezdin around inappropriate cases that happen in our community. Doesn't absolve them from calling the police. If people are dangerous, they should be off the streets. But we try wherever we can to keep things in-house because halacha, our halacha is not like their halacha. The whole thing is different. There's just so many differences. Anyways, why is it that we allow them to do this? So we allow them to go into a court of law, even though normally our kos shel goyim we try to avoid. But here, because it's matzel miyadam, we want to make sure that they don't have it if we can have it. The fewer possessions that they have, the more leverage we have. V'im haya kohen, then if there was a kohen and he had done something wrong, so matame b'chutz al ars ladunu la'ar eri mohem, you're even allowed to become tamei midrabanan. We know that there's what's called tumas eretz ha'amim, that we assume tumas eretz ha'amim is that there's a field there. We know for sure there was a body there, but the field was plowed, and we bury people in coffins and in iron and massive iron. So our bodies, even if they move, are covered twice over. Of course, they're in a pine box, and there's usually a hole in the pine to be connected to earth. That's the case, so that the body can decompose properly and be velafar tashuv. So you're allowed to become tameh if that mace gets messed up in a plowed field. The Gemara then says a wild thing that makes no sense. Just like he became tameh in chutzars, he can also become tameh in a beis hakvaros. Says the Gemara, how can that be? Beis hakvaros sal kedaitach. A Kohen is allowed to become tameh seemingly midoraisa? Even if you live in America, you are a Kohen, you're not allowed to go stand on top of a kever. That's just not happening. Says the Gemara, after all, Tuma Doraisi. You want to talk about Tumas Eretz Amim, that's Derabanan. You want to be Mekel because you want to have this idea of you're being Matzal Miyadam. I understand. You want to tell me that a Kohen can violate an Isser Doraisa? It's not Aseh Doche Los Aseh. It's not an Aseh at all. It's just a Los Aseh. There's nothing going on there. So says the Gemara, Ella, no. We're talking about a Beis HaPras Derabanan. We're talking about a field that's only a Beis HaPras Midrabanan. The Brisa continues, Umetame lilmo Torah v'lisa isha. We do allow people to become tame midrabanan to learn Torah v'lisa isha. That's a fascinating idea. Obviously, it's not tame midoraisa. It's only tame midrabanan. But we do allow for. I never really thought about that until this Gemara. Can you become tame midrabanan to learn Torah? I guess I never really thought about it to get married. Or Beis HaPras. But yeah, the case. Right. Well, I mean, everyone in Chutz La'aretz is Tamei Midrabanan.
How can somebody put himself into a matzah of becoming Tamei?
But that din applied before the Gzeira of Eretz Ha'amim. Eretz Ha'amim is a relatively, even in the times of the Gemara, it was later, just a few blot ago. Yeah, it was relatively late. But the din of leaving Eretz Yisrael only for valid reasons, I believe, predates the Tumas Eretz Ha'amim. I think that's the din. It became much more complicated. But all of us are Tumas Ha'amim. Anytime we walk over dirt. The what? Where are you? Halil Motorah? Yeah. Whoa. V'dafka b'harnach mitzvah shehein chashuvas lilmod Torah shegadol talmud Torah shemevi l'dei ma'isa v'isha aval l'shar mitzvos lo. Okay, that's a whole sugya. Good. Let's continue the brisa. Second of the wide lines, 3/4 of the way down. Am Rabbi Yehuda, Emasai. When are you allowed to become tamei midrabban and lilmod Torah lisa isha? That's only bisman she'en motzei lilmod. That's if you don't have the base medrash in a place that's tahor. Aval bisman she'motzei lilmod ein matame. He holds. Rabbi Yehuda holds. Okay, I understand. Maybe you want to go to the mirror, but that's an isser derabanan of tuma derabanan. But we have tells. Go learn in tells. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi argues, Rabbi Yossi Amar, Afilu bizman shemotze lilmod. Even if there is a base medrash in your neighborhood, yitma, you're still allowed to become tamei. Lefisha ein adam zocha lilmod mikol. You can't. That's not the place to be splitting hairs. You can learning, if you know you're going to learn better in a different yeshiva, that's still enough. Okay, you have a yeshiva down the block. We have a bunch of kollalim here in Chicago. But if you know you learn better in the one that's further, spend the extra time going to the one that's further. Become tamei midrabanan. Again, that's the thrust of the Gemara. And Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Maisa b'Yosef HaKohen shaholach achar Rabba letzidon lilmod Torah. There was in fact a story of Rabbi Yossi. I should say, Rabbi Yossi says there was a story of Rabbi Yosef HaKohen who went with his Rebbe to Tzidon to learn Torah. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha ke Rabbi Yossi. And he says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. And this shows that there is a deviation from the shita of the Chachamim. Rabbi Yossi himself mimics the shita of the Chachamim that one can be mahane, similar in tune to the fact that one is no, it's from the Reisha. Rashi says that the discussion is from the Reisha. That velokchen mehen behema. That our brisa, in the Tanakam of our brisa, the brisa says that in the first line of the brisa, it says holchen liyarid shel ovdei kochavim. Halfway down, it says velokchen mehen, that you're allowed to buy from them and log it. So that means that you're allowed to be mahane. So now we know that there is a shita. And when Rav Yochanan says that the halacha is like Rav Yossi, he knows that Rav Yossi argues on the Chachamim, which means that the Chachamim hold that you're allowed to be mahane to an akum. So how can we say that only Reb Shimon ben Lakish knows about the sheet of the Chachamim? It's pashat not true, because in another case, the Chachamim showed their cards. They said that you're allowed to be mahane by being lokchen mehen behemo avad mushvachos v'chulei. And Rav Yochanan even paskin on it. We don't paskin like the Chachamim. We paskin like Rabbi Yossi, but he clearly knew about the sheet of the Chachamim. You can be mahane, so that's a big problem. So Amar Lach Rabbi Yochanan, no, the two cases are different. La'olam lo pligi. V'lo kasha. Kan v'lokeach min hatagar deshak lemichsa minei. In one case, namely, in the Brisa, 3 lines from the top of the page of Reb Nassan Omer, where he says that you're not allowed to benefit from from a mahana, you're not allowed to give benefit. That's where you're buying from a tagar, from a store owner. When you buy from a store owner, deshak lemichsa minei. When I go to the store, they collect taxes from me. Where does the tax go? Whoever is in charge. And if it's an Avodah Kochavim culture, then it's going to go there. But Khan, in the Brisa where we saw the sheet of the Chachamim of Lokchen Mehen Behema, Khan belokech mi ba'al habayis, delo shakli mechsamine. That's when you're buying from an individual who is not collecting taxes. Sounds like tax evasion. The stores collect taxes because they don't have a choice. The private salesman seemingly doesn't really collect the taxes. That's tax evasion. But anyways, that's how the Gemara says it within Rav Yochanan. What? What?
Buying from the Balabais means something that he already bought and paid with.
If you have a small business and you're selling things. No, if you have a small business and you're selling things.
Well, this is happening.
What do you think is happening here?
I think it's the Balabais. He's selling. I bought a car, right? I'm selling it.
I paid my taxes on the first.
No,
It's graduating.
That's
what they take.
wow. I don't know. Maybe my mind just went there. Sounds like tax evasion. I have no idea. He's back. 8 lines from the bottom. The shakli mine mechza mina lokech venim samahana. That is it. I don't know, tax evasion or not, but this is the distinction. There are 2 shittas of the Chachamim. There's 2 shittas. We have Rabbi Nassan, who was talking about a case of lokech min tagar, and we have the Brisa in the middle of the page that says v'lokhem min mehem behema, that's mutter, but that's lokech mi balabais, that's mutter because no taxes are being collected. Okay, good. Let's analyze certain parts of this Brisa. We are 4 lines from bottom. Amar Mar behema te'aker. Asks the Gemara, this should be obvious. There is a discussion in the Gemara and in the Rishonim about the status of the Isser of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim. According to some Shitas, Tsar Ba'alei Chaim is a din deoraisa, an Isser deoraisa. It's not how we paskin. We paskin the Tsar Ba'alei Chaim is a din derabbanon. And to be clear, Tsar Ba'alei Chaim doesn't apply to insects. It doesn't apply to those, the creepy crawlies. You still have rachamim. You don't stamp on an ant colony just for fun. But to spray bugs that are in your house that shouldn't be in your house is a whole different ballgame. Anyways, the question over here is, I understand if you're saying that I did business with Avodas Kochavim that I should be penalized, whatever the slap on the wrist is. But does it really make sense that I should hurt the animal? After all, that should be a din of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim. So Amar Abai, Amar Achmana, no, there's a context, as Susehem Te'aker, in a context where it deserves to happen. You can't do Tsar Ba'alei Chaim stam, that's for sure. But if there is a context, then things change. Take a look at the pasuk that we're looking at as Susehem Te'aker. The pasuk says on the side, Vayomer Hashem Yoshua, Al tira mipnehem. They were at war. Don't fear them. Ki machar keis hazos anochi nosein es kulam chalalim lifnei Yisrael. They're all going to die. And as a result of taking their animals, as Susehem Te'aker. Yes, part of war, then we overlook the Isser Derabanan of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim. But you want to walk down the street and kick a puppy? That's Tsar Ba'alei Chaim. And you're ridiculous. Totally not normal. So the Gemara sidesteps the question of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim and says that there's a reason here why we were doing this. Then we have another question on Ikur. Amar Mar ve'ezu Ikur. We had said that this thing of Ikur is menasher parsoseh min ha'arkuva ulamata, of cutting some type of tendon from the knee or below. But we have another definition of of Ikur. What's this new definition of Ikur? So says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom. We have a brisa. This brisa can be found in Maseches Yom Hashkalim and Bechoros. The brisa says, "Ein makdishin ve'ein machrimin ve'ein ma'arichin b'zman hazeh." We are not makdish things, and we don't do these other types of donations and dedications and evaluations that we dedicate. And ve'im hikdish ve'hechrim ve'herich. If you did one of these things, which you should not have done, so then what do? So says the Gemara, behema te'aker. You were makdish. What are you going to do? Now the animal is not usable, right? So if it's a behema, you're te'aker, which we normally would have translated as cutting the tendon, cutting a ligament. Peros, kalim, peros ksus v'kalim yirkavu. Those should be left to rot. Ma'os v'klei matachos yodlichem liyam melach. And the Brisa says, ve'ezu ikor, noel delis b'faneh, v'himei samei eleha. So we've just given a whole new definition of ikor. On the last page, and a few pages ago, we defined ikor with clarity. It's cutting the tendon on the leg below the knee. But over here, we see that ikor is something drastically different. You're just locking the thing up in a pen and letting it die. It's dying me'eleha. You corral it into the pen and you close the door and then you move out of town. The animal will soon die. So that's what the Gemara says is as ikor. So we have a host of answers to this, but that's really what we're going to be trying to tackle now. And you'd gimel amid base 3 lines down. Answer number 1. Amar Abaye, Shani Hasam. In a case where you're makdish or machrim or marich, that case is different than when you take something from Avodah Zara. Shani Hasam, mishum bizayon kodshim. You're not allowed to be mevaze kodshim. It doesn't mean that if you're makdish it isn't kodshim. It is kodshim. You shouldn't do it. But the mechanics of being makdish, machrim, and marich, they work. So what are you supposed to do? You can't be mevaze them and cut the ankle. You can't do that because it is a bizayon kodshim. So says the Gemara, fine. But v'nishchate mishchat, why don't we just shech the animal? We shech the animals all the time. That's not a bizayon. That's actually what we would have done to the kodshim in the Beis HaMikdash. Go bishochet. Says the Gemara, we can't do that because asu behuli de takala. Rashi adds 6 lines down la'achla. We're afraid that if you shech the animal properly, someone's going to eat it. That's a huge problem. You cannot eat kodshim. You cannot be something that was mukdash, or I should say hektish is a better word. You cannot eat hektish. Says the Gemara, "Belishve gistra." You should make it into a gistra. Rashi says 6 lines down, gistra yachtechena lishnayim. In this case, if you cut the animal in half, haleka bizayon kodshim demesa maher. Isn't this fascinating? Cutting the ankle is considered to be a bizayon. Cutting the animal in half is not considered a bizayon kodshim. Why? Because it leads to death. It's fine if it dies. So why don't we? That's not a bizayon kodshim. Killing an animal, people kill animals all the time. That's normal. So why don't we cut it in half? Amar Abaye, we're not allowed to do that. Amar Abaye, Amar Kra. The reason we can't take your recommendation of a lishve gisra to cut it in half is because the pasuk says v'nitatztem es mizbechosam v'gomer, and then this next part of the pasuk is what we need to do. Lo sasun kain lashem elokechem. This is not how we treat kodshim. So the Gemara says in the name of Abaye, the problem is that it's bizayon kodshim. So what are we left to do? We can't cut its ankle because it's a bizayon. We can't shecht it because we're afraid that people are going to be bali de takala. We can't cut it in half. That's also lo sasum kein lashem elokechem. Nebuch, what are we supposed to do? So that's why he says, the Brisa says, no delis befaneha v'himei samei aleha. So that's Abaye's answer as to why, by the kodshim case, where a person was makdish, machrim, or marich, there we say lock it up in a pen and let it die, because we don't have another option. But otherwise, to be ma'akir does mean to cut the tendon.
Can we do some sort of tamuga or switch it around and so on and so forth? Wouldn't that be a lot easier than cutting it in one half?
I wonder if they would even allow. It's a great question.
You can sell this for money and give the money to the Maseches or whatever it is.
But what David is saying is that even if you do that, you're still going to be left with a kodshim animal.
Nothing to do with it, yeah.
You're right. You could kill animal 1, but animal 2 just became kodshim. You want to do tamura again, 2 to 3? 2 is not kodshim. You can kill it, but 3, there's always going to be the kedusha somewhere. You were makdish, and it doesn't disappear unless the animal dies on its own. I don't think so. And I think by Meiser Sheni we have that. I don't think we have that. I don't know. We haven't learned kodshim yet, and I fear that even when we do, we will not have learned kodshim. But that's a totally unrelated concern. I'm not being pessimistic. Maybe I'm being pessimistic. It's possible. Let's see Rava's answer. Rava says, why is it that we're not allowed to cut the animal's ankles? Because it looks like you're making a mum. Says the Gemara, nira? You just took a blade and you cut the Achilles heel of an animal. What do you mean nira? Mum al Yehu. It's a Givaldik mum. What do you mean near it? So says the Gemara. Yeah, Hani Mili Bisman Beis Hamikdash Kayam Dechazi Leakrava. So then you're right, it's a mum alma. But Hashta Delo Chazi Leakrava Leslan. But it's really not a big deal if we were to cut. It wouldn't have ruined the animal. We don't really call it a mum bisman she'ein Beis Hamikdash Kayam to do this kind of a cut. And he says it's only near it, kemat. So that's why we don't do it. It's not actually a mum, but we're still not allowing us to do it. You're also not allowed to give an animal that's a bal mum another mum, a separate din. That even though that animal's it's already a bal mum and it's not chazi la'akrava, you're still not allowed to give another mum. So says the Gemara, bal mum, when an animal already has a wound, but lidmei chazi, you're right. To cut it again would be a problem because you would normally sell it under normal circumstances. Lafuke hacha, where you are makdish, machrim, or marich, where the animal now has a higher level status of hektish or a cherem or an erech. So lafuke hacha delo lidmei chazi velo legufe. There's no value of this animal in this case. So there's really not much you can do here too. You're trapped. And that's how he answers this question. They're similar styles of answer, but they approach it a little bit different. Ashkeche Rabbi Yona le Rabbi Loi de koya pischa de tzur. Rabbi Yona and Rabbi Loi were at the opening of the city of Tzur. Amar le Ktani, we have a brisa. Behema te'aker. Okay, I understand that if I buy a behema on the day on Yom Edom of an Oved Kochavim, that I have to cut the animal's legs. I got it. I have to ruin the animal. It's not Tzar Ba'alei Chaim, I understand. Eved Mai.
This can get really dark.
What? Vilishve Gistra?
No,
how many people on YouTube are really listening? Is really what I want to know. So says the Gemara, Eved Yisrael lo kami boili. Not for reasons that you'd think, but when you have an Eved who's a Yisrael, you don't own the Eved that is a Yisrael. You can't actually be kona him. He's a full-fledged yid of his own making. Okay, he goes free, and if not, v'ratzah, right? We have all of the dinim by an Eved. He still goes free. But then the Gemara says, Ki kami boili Eved oved kochavim mai. Do we have to do some kind of mum if I buy an Eved akum, on a Yom Edom of an Avodas Kochavim? Amar le, says the Gemara, my kami boilach. What kind of ridiculous question is that? Now, if I paused here, you don't know which way is ridiculous. Is it ridiculous to not give the mum, or is it ridiculous to give the mum? We equate avadim to karka in halacha. We're pretty inanimate about, we're a little dispassionate about some of these comparisons.
If you're not going to tooth, you have to free them.
You're not got a tooth, you have to free them. There's a sensitivity there. That's true. So let's see what the Gemara says. About a third of the way down, Tanya, the Brisa says, "Ha'ovdei kochavim v'haroi behema daka." If you have ovdei kochavim or shepherds of a behema daka, lo malin v'lo meridin. You're not allowed to take. You're not required to take them out of a pit that they're stuck in. But we're also not moridim. We don't, in other words, directly cause damage. Therefore, even if you were to buy an Eved akum on the Yom Edom of an akum, we still would not do any damage to the animal. Oh,
You're not
to the Eved. I misspoke. I don't equate. Says the Gemara. Amar le Rav Yirmiyah le Rav Zera. Ktani, we have in our brisa lokchen mehen behema avadim ushvachos. This was from the brisa that we used with Rav Yochanan and Rav Shimon ben Lakish. So we said that we're allowed to buy a behema avadim and shvachos. Eved Yisrael. Are we talking about an Eved Yisrael that you are allowed to purchase from a goy on the Yom Edom, or Odelma afilu Eved oved kochavim? Amarle mistabra. It's logical to assume that there's a benefit of the Eved Yisrael because you're putting him into a Yiddish environment, which is a big. That's huge. You live in an Akum house with Avodah Zara. You live in a Yiddish house with Svarim and kosher food, like Eno Domen. The Eved Oved Kochavim, if what was meant by the Chachamim in that brisa was Oved Kochavim, lemai mibayle, what's the driver to help save him? You're not really saving him. He's a goy. Says the Gemara, it's not so pashut. Ki asa Ravin Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish, and this is a beautiful idea. Afilu Eved Oved Kochavim. If you bring an Eved Akum into your house, he needs a bris, and he keeps mitzvos like a woman. So those are mitzvos. The opportunity to do one mitzvah is liquid gold. So therefore, there is value in redeeming and buying, I should say, being lokeach the goy. Amar Rav Ashi, atu behema, when it comes to a behema, my machnis tachas kanfe shchina ika. What if we were to be talking about a behema? Why are you redeeming the behema? It's not really. Why are you buying the behema? Says the Gemara. The reason why why the Brisa allows to be lokeach even a behema. Why are we allowed to be involved in this? The Chachamim hold that way. The reason why is because elam mishum me'utaihu. According to other Gersots, it's me'atinhu, that we are reducing. What are we reducing? We're reducing their ownership. The more we reduce their ownership, the less control over us they will have. V'chanami, in our case, by the Eved, who is an Oved Kochavim, Dememate Shari. That's acceptable for us to buy things, again, only within the parameters of the Brisa for the Chachamim. Rabbi Nosson doesn't hold this way, but the Chachamim do hold this way, that we're allowed to buy things biyom edam in order to reduce their mass of property. Rav Yaakov Zavan Sandala. Rav Yaakov purchased a sandal on this particular day. Rav Yirmiyah Zavan Pita. He seems to have bought bread of some kind. Amar lechad rechaber Yesama. You're an orphan, namely, you're not with your Rebbe. Avad Rabchahachi. Your Rebbe would allow you to do that on Yom Edam. Amar le'idach. The other guy said, you're the Yasma. Avad Rabchahachi. Did your Rebbe do this? The Tarvayu, both of them were mistaken. The Tarvayu, they didn't buy from a store where there were taxes and that was going to benefit financially the Avodah Zara. Mibalabai Zavan, where there were no taxes. But both of them held that their friend had actually purchased from a store where there would have been taxes paid that would have benefited the Avodas Kochavim, which would have been problematic. Dama Rabbi Abba, Bered Reb Chia Bar Abba, Lo Shanu Ela Belokech Min Atagar. We saw this already, that the only prohibition of being lokech is when it's minat tagar, and you have to pay taxes, and some of those taxes are going to go benefit the Avodah Zara. It's absolutely permissible to do that. Again, only according to the Chacham. Reb Nosson doesn't agree. Amar Rabbi Abba, Bered Reb Chia Bar Abba. Ilmale haya Rav Yochanan hazimna be'asra de kashakil michsa afilu mi balabayis hava asar. If Rav Yochanan had been around in a place where they do collect taxes, even from a balabayis, he would have asared it. It's not the din in the balabayis; it's the din in the taxes. So let's say you have someone who has a business, and let's say it's a small business, they sell something and they do pay taxes. As it says the Gemara, then even if Yochanan would hold its usher, you got to look at the realities on the ground. It's not just about balabayis versus a store. Ela inhu hechi zavun. If that's the case, then how was there any purchasing? It must be the balabayis she'eno kavua zavun. We're talking about someone who's selling something one-off. If you sell something one-off, you're not opening an LLC or a sole proprietor. You're going to sell it. It's eBay. It's you're buying something off of Craigslist. We bought some kind of exercise, like a Stairmaster kind of thing off. It was like a couple $100. Totally shady. Would never do it again. But he didn't pay taxes on that. As you said earlier, he already paid taxes, so he's done. So that's the only way that one could have bought from a guy in an Avodas Kochavim setting, is if it was a balabais. But had it been a store, even according to the Chachamim who say lokchen, you cannot be lokchen if there are taxes being paid, because the Avodah Zara will benefit from it. We'll stop right here and pick up Amir Tashem tomorrow night with Daf Yud Dalet. Wishing you all a beautiful night.